Hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar hosted by Agents Helping Writers. Very excited to have you from here with us from all over South Carolina, India, Frankfurt, Manchester, Texas, Oregon. You're from everywhere, Toronto. So it's really exciting to have you all here. My name is Christina Strasberg, if we haven't met before. I'm the founder of Agents Helping Writers. Basically, if you haven't heard of us, we help writers shape their books so they can finally land a book deal. So we work with literary agents and best-selling authors like Alisha to make sure your book impresses. So you can find us at agentshelpingwriters.com. So let's get started. For those of you who don't know our special guest, Alisha is an award-winning and best-selling author of multiple books for kids and teens, including the upper middle grade Secrets of the Sand series, which is fabulous if you haven't read it, and young adult contemporary romances like Summer Constellations and Kissing Frogs. Her baby board book, Give Me a Snickle, won the prestigious inaugural Margaret Wise Award for excellence in children's literature. She's a writing coach. So Alisha, thank you so much for being here today.
No worries. It's my pleasure. You just were cutting out a little bit for me, so I didn't hear all of that, but hello, everybody. Nice to meet you.
So sorry. I
No,
said
I don't
only
know if
good
it's
things about you.
my internet is not always the best being on a Caribbean island, so
Only
yeah.
good things about you, I promise. So I'll start off the discussion maybe with a couple of questions, but for
Sure.
those in the audience, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So let's go to the beginning. Alisha, can you tell us a bit about your journey from being a literary agent to becoming a best-selling author?
Sure. Yeah, I started off as a literary agent. So I worked for a boutique agency in Toronto and developed my own kind of client list and worked really hard with them on their manuscripts and to sell their manuscripts. A lot of debut authors. And went to the book fairs in London and Germany and Frankfurt, where the big book fairs are. That's where you kind of go. Um, in New York as well to kind of sell your clients' work. So worked both domestically and internationally. Got a lot of debut authors book deals, which is really exciting. And then I went on maternity leave and I had a baby. And while I was on maternity leave, I started writing myself. Always kind of been a bit of a writer, but like didn't kind of give myself permission. I think a lot of us have that fear about calling ourselves writers or like who am I to call myself a writer? So but I did start writing during the maternity leave. We were in Panama. I was very inspired. I get really inspired by travel and in different locations. So my first book, Kissing Frogs, is set in Panama. And yeah, and then I decided after while I was writing, I went back for a little bit to agenting, and my heart was always very much in editing clients' work and helping the writers kind of, make their story as good as it could be, as opposed to kind of like the more selling aspect, which was great too. But I found my passion was very much about in editing, like more of editorial. So I decided, yeah, I've worked with all these writers, and I feel like based on my experience, I can, I think I could write as well, and give myself that permission. And then I started writing, and yeah, the rest is history. Not that it hasn't been like a struggle. Definitely, there's like it's not easy being a writer. It's not easy wanting to be published. Um, there it's but it's something if you really want and you devote your time to and stick with it, like it's the long what they say, it's a long game. You got to play the long game. So it wasn't something that just happened overnight, of course, but yeah.
So how would you say your experience as a literary agent influenced your approach to writing and storytelling? Because it sounds like editing was sort of the passion
Yeah,
for
just
agent.
getting so much exposure to different writing styles, different manuscripts, seeing what worked, what didn't work. I think the most important thing that agenting did for me was making me more receptive to feedback. So it can be really hard to get feedback, to hear things about your manuscript. Usually people will get defensive. Well, you're like, this is why I'm doing it, or this is what I meant, or so I think having experience giving that feedback to writers and seeing how different people took it And knowing like the feedback was for the betterment of their story, it made me more receptive to getting feedback. So you always have that initial, I think, resistance when you get the feedback, or at least I did. When I was working in the Secrets of the Sand series, um, the last book in the series, The Oracle of Averis, it was 80,000 words, and they wanted to bring it down because it's upper middle grade. They wanted to bring the word count down. So I basically had to cut the first 20,000 words of my manuscript. And it's the third book in this series, so I had to do that while working in all the information that I had in the first 20,000 words into the rest of the story and still make it engaging and, not overloading it with backstory or whatever like that. So I was very initially like, what? Like, that's a lot. But I remember the times I'd given advice knowing it was best for the author and their book. So I kind of put my faith in the editor, and did it. And I do think it made the book better and stronger. So yeah, I definitely think agenting helped me to become more receptive and open to feedback and realize that people are just trying to help me make my book the best it can be.
It's definitely tough because it's kind of like your baby, right?
Of
So
course, yeah, it's so personal, and you work so hard, and especially those first 20,000 words, getting those right, um, and then being told to scrap, kind of just suggesting it should be start actually in this spot, was like, oh God. But yeah, it was for the best.
I got that same feedback from on my first book with my literary agent who said, you need to cut 10,000 words.
Yeah,
And I almost had a heart attack because I'm like, where am
or
I going to find these 10,000 words to cut?
exactly.
So, with all your experience, knowing different styles and different books and different stories, what would you say are the key elements of a successful manuscript?
I mean, I think it's different for everyone because everyone has their own taste and style. I think you need to have, a character obviously is number one. You need to have a strong character. You need to want to root for that character, whether they're likable or unlikable, or be engaged by that character. I am not a huge fan of unlikable narrators. So I think you ultimately want to have like a character that you're going to root for, that you want to stick with for this entire journey, that you want to see grow. Um, and then yeah, and showing their growth and their development. I'm also a very big plot writer, so I focus a lot on plot and pacing. That's just my style. I like things to kind of move, and I like action. I like adventure. So I think for me that's important. And then yeah, so character, of course, plot, and then the writing. Um, you know, Practicing writing, and the only way you can get better at writing is by writing more, getting feedback. And yeah, having, that satisfying ending, making sure you're hitting all your kind of beats. Although sometimes you can get too caught up and making sure you're hitting those beats, like, for example, Save the Cat. You're like, okay, gotta have this here, gotta have this here. And that can trip you up sometimes. So sometimes I tell writers not to think about that. Keep it in mind, and like the big points, yes, but not to, you don't need to agonize like at like 47%, this needs to happen here in my manuscript, right? So um sometimes it can trip you up a bit. So just yeah, just kind of always increasing the tension, the conflict, the stakes must be high, all those different things.
So, you talked about keeping the stakes high, and I have found that's something that a lot of writers struggle with, making sure that things are harder and harder and harder for their character to go through. So, how do you keep the stakes raised?
I think I always think of it in my mind as, well, this is also for plot too. So what is going to be devastating to your character if they do not succeed at their goal, or what is going to ultimately kind of, you know, help them to grow. And the only way that the character can grow is through conflict and, facing difficult situations. And then out of each, they're kind of like, everything kind of makes you stronger in life and with your character. So every time they face an obstacle, every time they encounter a difficulty, what are they learning? How are they growing? And at the same time, like what's on the line if they do not succeed? So I think having those stakes in mind from the very beginning, of course there are literary novels where the stakes might not be so high or not fairly obvious. But I think if you're writing genre fiction and even nonfiction, of course, there has to be stakes, and that the character needs to learn about themselves to kind of evolve. Yeah, I just always kind of just thinking of that. What's important? What you can be a little bit easier in genre fiction because you can make, the world's going to explode or this person's going to die or something like that. So just always keeping those big big ideas and big stakes in your mind.
So you mentioned, wanting a pace that's going at a good clip, being a plodding author. Can you tell us a little more about that? How do you keep the pace going? Do you have any tips and tricks for people?
I mean, I think there just has to be a lot of, not a lot necessarily, but there has to be stuff that's happening. There has to be like this big through line. And how I envision pacing and plot is like it's like up and down, but always going up. So you got this like kind of little roller coaster, but you're still always heading to that climax. And there's anatomy of a story that talks about every scene must turn. So if you end up like up here, then like kind of you can take a breath, catch your breath, but you're building back up, and then catch your breath, and then you're building back up. So just keeping that kind of ebb and flow of tension and events that are happening, and you know in, for example, the desert print, which is like they're in the desert, so it's like they don't have any food, and then there's like a sand pit, and then there's like a sandstorm, and just throwing everything that you can at your character, and just kind of always envisioning that upward momentum.
Are there any literary tricks that you use? Like, for example, using shorter sentences during an action scene because readers are reading faster through
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Making sure, yeah, varying your sentence structure throughout the whole book, and making sure that if you are in like one of those scenes that it is very intense, and things are moving quite quickly, yeah, using shorter sentences, um, and kind of increasing that pacing. Um, there's what's called power positions, which are, either starting your sentence off with like strong words or ending your sentence off with strong words. Yeah, there's tons of things you can do. Reading your work out loud is also so helpful, um, because you catch certain things, and if your tongue is tripping over words, then that's not great. So I think, I mean, for all elements of your manuscript, reading your work out loud is hugely helpful.
And again, people, you can drop your questions in the chat. I don't want to be annoying
I
you
wish
with
I could see everybody's faces.
but yeah, drop your questions anytime, but I'll keep going and selfishly get mine answered. What do you consider to be the most important elements of creating a memorable and relatable character? You talked a little bit about empathy earlier.
Yeah, I mean, kind of getting in that character's head, and I think a lot of us, we are kind of our main character sometimes. Um, Writing from your own truth, using your emotions, um, really sitting in that character, you know, envisioning how they would react if you were them, how you would react. Um, Also, um, I kind of do use a Frankenstein approach in a few of my novels where I take a little bit of this person that I know and a little bit of this person that I know and kind of meld them all together to get that kind of interesting, well-rounded character. Making sure they have flaws, but they're also, someone we want to root for again. So yeah, there's lots of different strategies.
So we've got a couple questions in the chat. You having been on both sides, on the dark side of being a literary agent and on the light side of being an author, when is a good time to talk to agents? When should an author do that?
When their manuscript is as perfect as it can be. I mean, it's always great to network and to go to events and make connections, but don't send your manuscript until it's perfection. The one caveat to that is if if you're writing nonfiction, you can sometimes get away with a nonfiction book proposal, which is just basically a 50-page document that has like sample chapters and like all the kind of, usually your agent would do this though, but like all the kind of marketing stuff in there, like who your audience is, what the demographics, similar comp titles. Um, Also good to put in your pitch. And you can get away with that for nonfiction, but for fiction, it pretty much has to be like perfect, ready to go.
Just for those who have never heard the term comparable titles, just to clarify, it's like describing your book against another book, TV show, movie, kind of like if you were to say it's like Game of Thrones, but with fish,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something
Uh,
like
yeah, exactly. Like X meets Y with a dash of Z, kind of like just to kind of encapsulate, to sum up your project, so they can get a quick snapshot of what it's all about. And that's really good, important to put in your like opening few sentences to your query letter or your pitch to agent.
perfect. If no agents are biting on a manuscript, so let's say you've queried, you put your book out there, should someone consider self-publishing if they're getting consistent rejections, or is there another path?
I think absolutely nowadays, if publishing is your goal. I just read an interesting article of publishing last week and just about the state of it, and it's kind of in a state right now. Um, so I think, you can query a manuscript for, it depends how long you want to wait and depends what kind of person you are. If you really want to go the traditional route, then waiting 1 to 2 years, querying for 1 to 2 years. I would not send out your query or your manuscript in batches. I would blast it to everyone because editors take so long to respond now, to get back to you. And then just let the agent know this is a multiple submission, it's going out to other agents. And also, if you have one agent that fights, then you can go back to the other agents and be like, I have interest, and nothing will. Same. That's what agents do with editors as well. So nothing's going to get an agent or an editor to read your work more quickly if you say if you have interest from another agent. So kind of always, um, yeah. So making sure that your work is ready and then like sending it out, querying for, I think a year is not unheard of. And then if you really want to self-publish, getting it professionally edited, and then going for it, and getting a cover. And I mean, it depends. I'm not super entrepreneurial, so you kind of have to be an entrepreneur. And some people are really successful at self-publishing, maybe not the best writers, but very good entrepreneurs and business people, and know how to like, have their keywords in Amazon and all of that kind of stuff. So um, that could definitely be a route if you're not getting any bites and you really want to get your book out there.
Yeah, exactly. The entrepreneurial part is, I think, so important because you need to market your book. You need to be a marketer and a seller,
Even
essentially.
even if you're traditionally published, like the publishing house does very little in the way of marketing for you. You have to. It's exhausting actually. And I'm kind of taking a break from social media because I feel like you're just always just like, oh, read my book, annoying your friends and family. So, and you'd be surprised, like you think like your friends and family will buy your book and they don't always. And then the people that do, you're like, oh, surprise. It's interesting. It's interesting.
What
So,
I would also add is if this is your first book, and you self-publish it, and you intend to traditionally publish perhaps a second book or try again, you really need to make sure that your sales of your self-publishing book are good. Otherwise, you're giving an agent or a publisher a reason to pass if your book only sold 3 copies.
right. Or
Uh,
you just want to mention it.
exactly, and hope they don't Google you.
Yeah.
Let me,
I mean, that's fine. I mean, I went as an agent, if an author had self-published before and I read their book and I like read it or read a few chapters and I thought it was good, it wouldn't necessarily deter me from signing them as a client because it hadn't sold a lot of copies. Because honestly, it's hard to sell books. Very hard
yeah,
to sell books, even if you have a traditional publisher. So yeah, I mean, you can always, if it's something you're not proud of, you can always take it down off Amazon. No problem. So, but yeah,
a
uh,
few
there's
questions.
lots of great questions in here.
Yeah, let me just scroll back up. So, do you have any tips on writing young adult novels?
Oh, yeah. Make sure you're around young people and listen to the way they talk, watch teen movies. Um, I think it helps for you to be young at heart. I think, I read a YA novel, and it was so obviously written by like an older man that I just was like not buying it. So if making sure your expressions are current all at the same time. Expressions go in and out. So, not maybe not using like the most current expression, but um, just, you know, having that youthful voice, being around teenagers, watching teen content, reading YA novels, of course. If you don't, how can you write YA if you don't read YA? So yeah, that would be my tip. Read, immerse yourself in the genre.
And I think digging into your personal memories can help. How you
Yeah,
felt at your first kiss, how you felt on your first date, your first test failure, those types of things can help
yeah,
to
100%.
mind those feelings. We have, what qualifications does one need to get into the writing space or be able to get a writer's assistant position?
In what way? Like as an assistant for a writer? Like,
It seems
can you clarify exactly into the writing space? What does that mean? Like in publishing or because there's tons of different spaces for writers. So
okay, so we'll ask the person who asked that question. I think it was Gita. Hopefully I pronounced that right. If you can let us know and clarify, we'll get back to that. Our next question is, do readers need to like all of the characters, or is it okay to not like the main character until the reader learns why the character is the way he or she is?
I think that's a personal question. I think even if they don't maybe necessarily need to like the character, but they need to be engaged by the character and interested in the character. Um, so yeah, you obviously want to see your character grow. So maybe you don't love the character at the beginning. Um, you know, we all, and that's kind of point of your book is your character learns something about themselves or life or, you know, and so, um, they don't always, but there, you do have to give them some likable qualities. So maybe they're like a grumpy old man, but like they have a soft spot for like the homeless cat and leaves food out for them. So there has to be something in there that you makes you engaged or want to find out more about the character and want to be on this journey with them. So yeah, they don't necessarily always have to be like super likable, but you definitely want to root for them and follow along on their journey as mentioned before. So
Okay.
something has to intrigue you about that character that you're going to stick around for a whole book.
You mentioned social media earlier and taking a break. Do you need strong social media presence to be a writer for fiction
Yeah, so
novels?
if you had asked me this a couple of years ago, I would say yes, like it definitely helped, but you don't actually. No, you don't need a strong social media presence. I think now with people, you know, like Instagram used to be like Bookstagram and all that kind of stuff. It used to be so much bigger than it is now. And you have Book Talk now, which is on TikTok. So it can definitely help for sure, but it's not something that's necessary. What you need is a good book, a good story, and then everything else has no bearing. You're not going to get a book deal because of your social media. Well, caveat, yes, you will if you have a huge audience and you're a book talker, and maybe I know like some people who were really kind of famous influencers and you know worked basically the editor would or ghostwriter would help them write on their book. And that's like celebrities, right? Celebrities don't write their own books. Like everyone thinks no, they're written by ghostwriters or heavily written by the editor. Uh, so I guess if you're in that stratosphere, then yes, you can for sure probably get a book deal without with that. But if you're just a regular person, then yeah, it's you know, it's icing on the cake, but definitely not necessary. And I don't think editors or agents really care about that anymore, as they did say like 5, 10 years ago.
Mhm. What is the most common mistake writers make that will garner an instant rejection?
Mm, that's a hard one. I don't know. Like an instant, like I mean, yeah, I don't know what makes why each agent would reject. I don't think there's anything you really you can do. Like I mean, being rude or be like, hey, I sent you this. Why haven't you gone back? You know, um, but even like saying the wrong like people always talk about personalizing your query letter for each agent. And yes, that's a nice touch, but like also that's not gonna not they're not gonna be like, oh, he didn't personalize it to me or didn't know which books I worked on. That's not gonna stop them from reading your book if it's a good hook and it's a good story. So I don't really think there is anything like that's gonna be like, I mean, yeah, again, unless you're like rude in your query letter, um, you know, making sure you have like all the essentials. And there's so many articles out there about how to write a good query letter or pitch. Just having your genre and your word count, and having those comp titles in there, like X meets Y, whatever. Um, those are like just the basic things. If you follow, yeah. And every time you submit to an agent, each agent has their own different submission guidelines. Some prefer you to go through Query Tracker. Some prefer you to email them the first 5 pages, following their instructions. So I guess that would be it. Making sure you're following the instructions. Don't send it to multiple agents at the same agency. You can't really do that. If they reject it, then maybe, and if they reject it, they usually reject it for the whole agency. But sometimes an agent will be like, hey, this isn't right for me. This isn't a great fit for me. And remember that, like, just because your book isn't a great fit for one agent doesn't mean it's not a great fit for another agent. So remember that if you're getting rejection. And they will recommend you submit it to their buddy at their agency. But ultimately, yeah, I think following the instructions on the agency website, don't like send them your whole manuscript if they just ask for the first 10 pages. Like that's annoying. So yeah, following the instructions. Rule followers.
Our next one is, have you ever experienced agents trying to water down the content of your book?
No, why would an agent want to water down your content? Like
So
they want to make it as juicy as possible, right? Like if I mean, of course there are exceptions. Like if you're writing YA, you might not want like a intense rape scene in there. But like it's just I don't think and a good agent will work with you. A lot of agents, I think I'm not sure if this is becoming a bit less now, where they have higher expectations of your manuscript. So back when I was agenting, which was quite a while now, I guess not quite a while, but like 10, 12 years ago, um, I really did a lot of editorial, and a good agent will do a lot of editorial work on their client's book before they submit it. But I think the expectation now is that it's pretty much good. I mean, though you still will get editorial feedback from your agent, but they're not gonna maybe be they just don't have the time. Um, so they want to be focused on selling the books as opposed to editing. So a good agent will also provide editorial feedback, I think. But yeah, just I forgot what the question was now.
how would they water down?
Oh, water down. Right. Thank you. No, they will not want to water down your work. I don't. Why would they want to water down? Why would you want like a watered down version of a story? I don't think.
I think it's more like you mentioned, making sure that your
It's
book is
appropriate for the
appropriate.
audience and genre. If you're writing horror, then like God, I've read some crazy, um, crazy stuff, and if that's the genre expectations, then yeah.
What are some typical mistakes you see writers make with opening pages of their novel?
Yeah, not starting right in the action, or too much backstory. So starting like, in like right there, like what's happening, hook me from page one. Your opening pages are so important because literally you have basically 5 pages to hook the agent. If you don't hook them within 5 pages, done. Doesn't matter how amazing your middle or your ending is. So I'd say the beginnings are the most important. Of course, your middle and your ending is important. The whole thing is important. But again, if you're not hooking if you're not hooking them, if they're not liking your writing, within those first 5 to 10 pages, it's tough.
I think something I've also seen is focusing so much on those first 5 to 10 pages and polishing them to an amazing degree, and then not doing it to the rest of your
That's
manuscript.
also true. Yeah, that's also true. Having that throughout, but yeah, you want the whole book as polished as possible.
So what is the recipe for a bestseller, or is there one?
Mm, I mean, I guess it depends. I don't know. If I knew that, I'd be a millionaire. The recipe for a bestseller. I mean, a good story, good writing, a luck, honestly, luck. Right place, right time. There's so many talented writers out there. Um, you know, it, yeah, a lot of it is luck. A lot of it's crapshoot, like, but you must have strong, strong story, well drawn characters, plot if it's more genre-y, it's important. Um, and yet you must kind of connect with the reader in some way or somehow, connecting, so sharing. the deepest parts of yourself that will reach out and touch something in another person. And like for example, Eat, Love, Pray by Elizabeth Gilbert, that really kind of was a runaway success because it connected in something with, all of us, especially women of a certain age who just were like longing for an adventure. Maybe, they're kind of stuck in the day to day. And so yeah, connecting with an audience, uh, good stories, strong writing, great characters. I'm also a big fan of setting, which is not necessarily important for a bestseller, but that's one thing in my writing is that like setting is it just kind of transporting the reader to a different time and place is, I think, if you can do that, then you have them.
So you touched on something interesting about genres. Do you believe that there are genres that have certain expectations of them, like mystery or, I don't know, romance or any of those types of genre books?
Yeah, of course, you have to kind of follow the genre. I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule, but you do have to, if it's a romance, then you want to have a happy ending where the characters, I mean, are together. Um, and mystery, of course. Yes, there must be a crime that's being solved. So I do think, yeah, you do have to kind of abide. But there's also subgenres within the genre, and knowing your genre is also very important. You'd be surprised at how many books or queries I got where the genre wasn't clear, and editors and publishers need to know where they're going to put your book on the shelf or and how to market it. That's very important. How to market, is your book easy to market? So, thinking about your genre, making sure you follow those genre guidelines. Um, and it's always great when someone's able to kind of twist something on their head. But ultimately, if you're writing, romance, you got to have your characters, so they must be the central focus. But then if it's like romantic suspense, then so yeah, subgenres. So then you got to have that. That is like equally weighted. Ultimately it's focused on the romance, but you got to have your adventure and your suspense and your kind of fast paced like action. So yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the tenses that people use to write a novel? So is it wrong to write it in present tense? Is it wrong to write it in past tense? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think write in whatever tense you're most comfortable with, and what you envision your story with. So for my first book, YA generally is mostly present tense, but not always. And my middle grade book is is also present tense. So all of my books are present tense. But I've started working on something recently, and it's in past. And this is the first time I've used past. And it just feels it fits the story better. So again, why if you're writing YA, I do usually recommend present tense because that's kind of a convention of the genre. But not completely 100% necessary. It's not like you're not going to get a book deal because of your tense. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Write what you're most comfortable, and be aware. If so, for example, in one of my writers groups, I had some people who were they were writing YA, so I suggested they write it in present, and they did, but it takes a while to get the hang of it. So if you're not used to writing in present, then you'll get a lot of mixed tenses coming in. So, present, present, then there's past for a couple of paragraphs, then you go back to present. So just writing whatever, is most comfortable and easiest for you, I think is the most important thing.
Perfect. So someone's next question, which is interesting, is I'm just going to read it out. I'm writing my first novel, and I have changed my working methods multiple times. Currently, I'm creating the storyline from start to end, including all plot and character moments. Would it be better to be more spontaneous and just start writing and come up with ideas on the way? So this is the ever debate,
Plotter versus pantser.
plotter, plancer, whatever you want to call it, anything in between.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's so personal and it's all about your style. So maybe you're more of a plotter. Maybe you like to have those key moments. I was a very, I personally was a loose plotter. I know some people who write the opposite. They have everything outlined, pages and pages of outline, and it does, I think it can help make your writing faster. But I'm kind of more a pantser. And I think sometimes we get caught up or stuck in making sure we have the perfect outline or everything is just so before we start writing because we're kind of scared to dive in. So I think if you start, for me, if you start writing, like my first two books, I knew like several like, very loose things where I wanted to happen and that I wanted to go. So my first book, Kissing Frogs, is a retelling of the Frog Prince fairy tale. So I knew like so YA romance. I knew like I wanted to have 3 dates. And again, this was set in Panama, so it was like things I had done, like whatever. It's based on the Princess and the Frog fairy tale. He's like, if you do these 3 things, like eat, let me eat from your plate, sleep on your pillow, whatever. He would get her golden ball. So it follows that structure. So I think you know like the big events that are happening and your climax. You got to know like what the big. Not you don't always have to know, and it could change. But I think not holding yourself back from writing. And as you write, you discover things. Like what was that quote by? I think I forget who it's by, but you can drive with. You can. I'm totally flipping it right now, but like you can drive with one headlight. If you can see the road ahead of you, and you can get the whole way there just by seeing what's exactly ahead of you. That was a very bad butchering of a quote that I'm sure that I usually have on the top of my head, but I'm going blank right now. But basically, if you start writing, things will, as you're driving and you're writing, things will appear as you go along. And knowing vaguely where you're, no, not necessarily vaguely, could be vaguely, could be concretely, but knowing where you're going is helpful. But also, I think we need to start writing at some point. And sometimes we're just stalling. And also, again, it depends. Some people are hardcore plotters, some people are hardcore pantsers. I'm a little bit in between, probably more pantser. I do like to know my bigger beats, where I'm heading, what's happening a little bit, but at the same time, a lot of stuff does reveal itself to me as I write, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. I am a plotter who will write a 20,000 word outline and then change everything while I'm writing.
And that's the other thing, right? Like maybe you're like, oh wait, this actually does not work, or this will be way better. So yeah, so don't get too hung up on your outlines or yeah, your outlines.
Well, I think you're totally right. I think it's doing what works for you. If writing and just starting to sit down with a blank piece of paper works for you, then you should totally do that. And if you need more time to think of your story, you should totally do that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your thoughts on books set in Canada, specifically in Ontario? And I'm going to guess, because we had a similar question, possibly actually from the same person in the previous webinar we did. But there's a lot to be said about, the American publishing world and not always being so open to books set in Canada, or
Yeah,
other
that's
places.
interesting. Again, kissing frogs. They weren't Canadian students that went on the field trip to Panama. They were American students, and I did that because this is like I got this is 12 years ago. I also felt like having that kind of. But I think nowadays, I don't think it matters. And if it's a good book, I don't think it matters where it's set or where your characters are from, or editors are not going to read it because it's set in Canada. Um, I mean, it could be small town anywhere, right? Um, and and if you're Canadian and you're writing it inside Canada, that there can be some incentive to that for publishers, smaller presses in Canada, also applying for grants, also winning awards. Um, Again, our audience is both probably American and Canadian, but like I don't. I mean, if your story takes, I had a girl in my writing group, and it was set in Toronto Island, and it was fascinating. It was like how the back in World War it became like a um, a, a Navy base camp to train flyers, like fighter jet flyers at Toronto Island did. And that was very local for me because I lived in Toronto, and um, all that I thought that was so interesting that she had said there, and it didn't deter me from reading it. And I think if I was an agent in the US, it wouldn't have deterred me from reading it. If you make your setting come alive, it doesn't matter where it is.
Good place. Writing is quite a lonely job in the sense you spend a lot of time alone. How do you keep yourself from being so isolated?
I think it's really important to have writer friends who get it, because a lot of people don't get it. They can't get it, and only other writers know what it's like to write a book. It's flippin' hard. And you need that kind of motivation also, like, hey, let's do 5 pages each week. Like, let's hold each other accountable. And also having someone to bemoan, to lament the industry and how hard it is so good to like get that out. Because I find for me personally, like a few years ago, when my books came out, there were certain things I was like, oh, I wish that the publisher had done this and then done that, and oh, Canadian publishing and blah 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 blah. So it was very good to have a good writer buddy or two. All you need is one, but the more the better. To have your own writing group. It's also great to get feedback as beta readers for people who will read your work kind of first. So having a writer friend and connecting with other writers, I think is crucial to your mental health, your writing health. Um, having, yeah, so I think it's very important to kind of reach out to other writers, and that's a way to make those is to do, writing workshops, joining writers groups, I guess, in your local area would be helpful. It doesn't have to be local, you can meet them online. I know there's so many Facebook pages, but I don't know about how well some people are able to connect and maybe did more so back in the day with Facebook writing groups, which is finding other writers in your area. I mean, it could also be online, of course, as I said, but yeah, reaching out, going to conferences, taking a writing class, um, taking a writing workshop is a great way to meet other writers who are kind of in the same place as you. Uh, yeah.
I'm going to do a shameless plug. Alisha actually has a writers group starting May 14th, which is Tuesday nights from 7 to 9 p.m. Basically, you exchange writing with Alisha. Alisha gives you feedback, amazing feedback. And even more incredible because she's been a former literary agent and she's an award-winning writer. So she gets to give feedback from both of those experiences. But anyways, that I can drop the link later in the chat for people interested. But we do have that group starting May 14th. And it's also a really great way to connect with the other writers in the group.
Yeah.
They're small, intimate groups, and you can't help but become friends by the end of the 6
Yeah,
week.
it's like camp, like a bonding experience. Also, it's very vulnerable sharing your work. So yeah, you do form those kind of connections with us. And sometimes you get some different personalities in those writing groups, but it's always been a great experience leading those writing groups for me.
Yeah, I did a coaching program exactly like the ones we offer with with the agents we offer. And by the end of it, my personal writing group that we meet once a week all came from people who are in those groups that I met. Now
Amazing. Yeah,
you meet online once a week. There's someone in California, someone in Toronto, a couple of us in Ottawa, and it
perfect. Yeah.
those
And so
uh,
that's very invaluable, I think, those writing groups.
absolutely.
And the
Here,
fastest way to improve your writing.
yeah, exactly. Another question here. Are you worried about anything you write in your novel getting you canceled? For example, some characters in this individual's novel engage in violent acts, and they're worried that people will think that the author fantasizes about performing such acts.
That's a good question. I think there's an element of that now in today's society where you have to be mindful of what you say. Um, in terms of like a lot of publishers will have sensitivity readers. I think, everyone is very quick to take offense and to react to. This is why I don't go on Twitter anymore, really. um, but I feel like you do have to be mindful if you're, I mean, but again, but there's some pretty twisted and depraved stuff that have been written by authors. It doesn't mean that the author wants to do them, right? You think of like Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code. Like the guy is like in a circle. Like I don't even remember the real kind of details of it, but it was pretty gruesome. And yeah, like a pentacle carved into his chest or something like I don't know, something like that. But no, they know people know that. I don't think that's what would get you canceled. Writing a gruesome act. I more think it'd be like saying like something that's offensive or I mean, and it's hard because you don't want to censor yourself, but at the same time you do have to be mindful. But also at the same time, publishers will, editors will let you know, hey, let's take this line out. For example, I had what did I have? Oh, my summer constellations. I actually had a reader write me, I think. It was making me feel crazy, I said it, one of the characters said. And they're like, actually, that's offensive to people with mental health issues, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, thank you. It's published. There's nothing I can do about it now. But so people are gonna their opinions. You know, of course, being mindful and sensitive to other people's positions and you know where they're coming from is important, but at the same time you shouldn't censor yourself so much because that will stifle your creativity in your writing. Um, and if someone like, if you know, if you have a couple of readers saying, "Oh, well, this is like way too much," then yeah, you've got to take that into consideration. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't worry about like things like it's yeah, death and like murder mysteries and like some novels are pretty. There's some pretty crazy stuff, and I think those writers are all fine.
Yeah, there's definitely some twisted things. I love the mystery genre. It's one of my favorites. And there's a lot of disturbing things that happen in those books, from mutilation to eyes popping out, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
Uh, but the best advice I've heard from an agent was it has to have purpose.
right.
So
Can't be
random violent acts
gratuitous.
for no reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see who's next. Okay, not a question, but a comment, but I think it merits to be read because it's directed to you. Thank you so much for advice, advocacy, and support for new writers. Awesome. You're all great. I'm excited for the workshop and hopefully meeting more people. They're writing a serious nonfiction investigative, but some of the story is so ridiculous it is comedy. So thank
That's
you.
amazing, though.
Yeah, I'm actually quite curious. Now I'm like, I need to read this book.
I
Uh,
think, like, I mean,
Yeah.
you got to have a little humor in everything, even if you are writing something serious.
Hi. Yeah, this is Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth.
And I've been messing with my camera. Let me see. Okay. Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
thank you so much. It's true. Well, and it just depends. I think that my problem has really been, not that this is a therapy place, but it is kind of, right. Writing is, for all of
Yeah,
that,
for sure.
it's that writer's block that you were speaking of. So I really appreciate your information on the 5 to 10 pages, because we can chunk down the story, is that right? And then kind of, at least get the good 5 to 10 pages, at least gets me somewhere to start. But it does seem that some of the information is pretty serious. So I feel like I'm always in this serious mode, but it's real time. So it's not like a 1 to 2 year, maybe it doesn't matter, but something that's to help people like now, like so I've been looking at investigative like news places, but I'm new to this. I do ghostwriting for my job, research, but for some reason, stepping over it into my own realm, it's tricky for me. Like I just feel unsteady. Like, where's my boss? Is this okay? Is this how, So this is really appreciative. Thank you for this.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Yeah, it's always hard when you start out. And like the first stuff we write is not going to be like Pulitzer Award winning most of the
Right.
time. Like, so it's good just to keep like to write and to practice and to keep going. And then maybe when you're done your book, you'll go back and you'll be such a stronger writer. And then you can, revamp the beginning. But the important thing is to get a first draft done. And it's so hard to do.
Yeah.
It's so hard to make yourself write every day. I don't. I'm terrible to turn off that little editor on your shoulder who's like, this sucks. Stop writing. Why are you writing? You just gotta tell them to shut up, go away. Get that first draft done because then you have something to work with. Then you have that raw kind of, and I say like it's your first draft is going to be a mess, and that's great. That's normal. But having something that raw lump of clay that you can mold and shape. And I'm a big rewriter myself,
Okay.
so I will write things over and over and over again, making it
Well,
better.
it's funny because, I'm in, and this is just, not to be, that there's a real time issue. It's a serious, divorce, women, these things that we go through, identity theft, cyber attack. It's all
Oh yeah.
real. It's all happened. And it's just, the information I'm finding is just mind blowing, and I was threatened jail, things like that. It's just wrong. It's bullying to women, but it's just kind of like, I need to make this stop happening. But I know that I can't rush it. Like you were just saying, just kind of get it
Yeah.
right, and story
I'd
in
start
there.
with a story, like start with a concrete, like an example of like what, like Jane was just on her way to work when blah blah. Like start with a story and then you can kind of
All
work
right.
everything into
Okay.
yeah.
Cool.
Start with a
Thank you.
strong scene, a strong image, like something like shocking that happened. Like she checked her bank account, it was empty, like kind of that kind of thing, you know. That
I
was the
got a
thing.
couple. Yes, for sure. Thank
Amazing.
you.
Good luck.
Thank you. Hopefully you talk some more.
What I would add, Elizabeth, is if you're writing nonfiction, and maybe Alisha can tell us a little bit more, but I think you can do a nonfiction proposal to get an agent and have a couple of
Really?
chapters.
Yeah, I think yeah, you could more. That's more like when you have an agent to do for an editor. But you do kind of need more like the story written, I would say, to like a nonfiction proposal. Not always. Um, Again, if you have like a huge platform or whatever, or you have like you have if you have a couple good stuff, you could, but it's I would say always better to have a full manuscript ready to go.
And I have, thank you for this
Another shame.
information. And some of it though, I feel like there's so many different subjects. I need to chunk them down. It's like a big fire hose coming at people. They're like, what? And it definitely sounds like a fictional movie, but it's not, So anyways, to keep the information. So I guess, partly what you were talking about earlier, the 5 to 10 pages, I've really kind of been, I'm almost, the action and the suspense and like everything, the events, like each event, I guess. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah,
rambling.
you also
crazy.
need like a through line too, right? Like what's the through line? You can have all those stories kind of, but yeah.
Okay.
Definitely like to take, I think for you, like take a minute to kind of think about the story, what you want to tell and where you're going, and then using stories to illuminate your point.
Okay. All right. I'm going to take 2 shots at it. Thank you.
Good luck.
I'll do another shameless plug. We have a literary agent who has, I believe her session starts a week before yours, Alisha, like May 7th or 8th. Her name is Catherine Wilms, and she is a literary agent who represents exclusively nonfiction. So she is a great coach to help with structure and sorting things out and everything nonfiction. That's her jam. So I'll also drop a link to that at the end of the session today for those who want to get to know Catherine.
I feel like you guys are all my new best friends, and I'm going to talk about you all week. Oh, thank you. Guys are amazing. Thank you.
What happens when writers get together? We all just commiserate.
Well, and everything you said about, people not understanding for sure, and what's that movie, Funny Farm with Chevy Chase? Have you guys seen that?
No.
No. Or
You
I guess
have to check it out. He's a writer. It's pretty funny. Please, yeah, for your weekend. Funny Farm, Chevy Chase.
Oh, Jennifer had a great question.
yes.
How do you think about scenes versus chapters? Can you write chapters and scenes? I think in scenes. That's how I write. I think very filmically. I think like a movie. So especially for my middle grade series, it's adventure. So I think scene, and every scene has to turn. So again, as I said that, like, you're kind of like going up. But yeah, I think very much in terms of scenes. And of course, you probably have heard this, but you get into the scene as late as possible and you get out as early as possible. And then you string all those scenes together. And so that when I wrote my first book, that's kind of what I did. I had all these like different scenes kind of written on cue cards, like that I just would, kind of like move around, be like, okay, this is what I want to happen. And then you see what scene you need to make to connect these 2 points. So yeah, that's a great question.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So I'm writing a YA mystery, and I'm just wondering about, for that audience, keeping the chapters on the shorter side versus, like, I don't know what your sense is for YA.
Yeah, I mean, again, no rules, but for sure, I think if you're keeping, that's probably best. If you're keeping your chapters on the shorter side, yeah, it's like,
just to keep
5 to 7 pages. That's what my that's what my chapters are for the upper middle grade adventure series.
5 to 7 double space.
I mean,
pages.
again, you might have one that's 8 or 9, or you might have one that's like 3 or 4, but like overall, you want to kind of keep them consistent. And then, yeah, I would say that's a good way to go for sure.
Okay, great.
Because teens, I mean, they have
they've short.
short attention span.
Exactly, like even shorter for a teen.
And also for the genre, for the mystery, like, yeah,
yeah, I'm thinking about really keeping it pacey and really
Yeah.
moving it along in a
Yeah.
quicker way. So,
Yeah, I
okay,
think that's a good way to, for sure, to go.
great. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Alisha, can you expand on the idea of getting into the scene at the last moment and getting out or getting out as soon as you need to? So I have totally butchered quoting you, but you know what I mean.
No, so
Getting
getting in at the last minute.
like-
So basically getting in right when everything's going down, basically, or about to go down. So you're not like, you know, ambling for a while before you kind of get to the action. You're like in there, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, this is the situation. And then getting out means just like ending it before it kind of meanders again too long while the, so kind of like you're always kind of in I'm also going to butcher this media raise where like in the action, is that what it is? Like
Oh,
you're
the
like,
last.
yeah, you're in it. You're going to have some downtime here and there. And again, different writers do different things. That's my style. So maybe other people, but you want to keep the reader turning the page. Number one rule.
Yeah,
So yeah.
this person was looking for an example. So the first thing that came to my mind was like somebody going to work and driving in their car. Nobody wants to read 5 pages of somebody driving to work. But if at the end of a paragraph there's a flat tire, they get pulled over by the cops, their car blows up, that's
Exactly.
you want to start your story, but you want to leave before you get into the ins and outs of talking to a cop for half an hour and giving an accident report.
Yeah, totally.
Got another question. Would a double book release be possible?
If you're self-publishing, you can do whatever you want. So absolutely. They, but I don't know. I think that like you would want to at least space it by a few weeks. And then because the 2 novels I wrote both take place chronologically during the same time. Oh, I see. That's really interesting. I don't know. Like I think it would depend on if you're traditionally publishing. It would depend on the publisher, who would ultimately decide that. It would depend on the book, and they also could say, well, why don't you interweave those narratives into one story? But again, if that's not what your vision is, then yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, I've never really seen that done before with traditional publishing. Sorry, I've never seen that done before with traditional publishing, where 2 books by the same author are released. Because you want to, in terms of marketing, you want to focus on one project and sell it, and then a publisher's they're gonna see how that book does before the next one, right? So you can get a 2-book deal for sure, but I don't know if I've never seen that. It could be an interesting marketing gimmick. Yeah, I've never really seen that. And again, but self-publishing, you can do whatever you want, obviously. So
Yeah, I would say like debut authors, that would be a pretty rare.
yeah, I've never even seen that for like an
Yeah.
established author. I mean, I guess Nora Roberts, well, her team of writers, or Nora, is churning out books, same with James Patterson. But those are like, yeah.
All right. We are now at 1 minute 2, so I'm going to sneak in one last question for you. What contributes to a strong, satisfying book ending?
I think it's whether the character has, again, realized something about themselves or life profound for them, and potentially for the reader. I think it's important to wrap up any kind of loose ends. Of course, you might not always, because you could have a book that continues. Like my series is like it's actually not as, you have to read one before the other. Well, no, you don't have to, but it's best. So you can leave things open, but the main objective, the character's main goal, or story arc has to be resolved. So they've grown in some way, they've developed in some way, they are changed by their story at the end. I think that's probably the most satisfying ending.
Couple announcements before everybody sneaks off. One, thank you so much to Alisha for answering all these questions and giving her time for today's webinar. Super informative. There's already people in the chat saying how great this information has been, Alisha, and how they appreciate everything you've shared. Again, also thank you to the audience for so many great questions.
Yeah, thank you guys all much for spending your Saturday with us. And it was lovely to hear all your questions. And I wish you all the best of luck with your writing. And don't give up.
So hopefully you found today's webinar insightful, inspiring, motivating, useful, helpful. I'll be sticking around a little longer. For those of you who have questions about our coaching programs or working with Alisha, I can answer all of those for you. And I also want to mention that we will be sending out a link to the replay of the webinar. So if you want to go back to some of the conversation or the questions because you've missed something, you'll be able to do that. And in that same email, you'll get a very super quick survey, which just helps us figure out what we're doing and how to make it better. So if you can take a minute and answer that, that would be amazing. And the other thing I'll invite you to is to book a story session with me. It's completely free, whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your writing. We just want to help people. So the topic of the story session is up to you because it's focusing on you and your needs. If you're not sure what that is and what you could do in it, here's some stuff that I've covered in the last couple of days alone in story sessions. Strategizing how to query agents, brainstorming story solutions for a writer who is stuck, brainstorming plot twists for a mystery, creating a new character, breaking through writer's block, how to develop a writing routine, and just generally answering questions about what it's like working with literary agents and the status of the publishing industry. So they're designed to be collaborative, they're informal, they're just a fun 30 minutes that we can talk about writing. They're completely free. And in that email, I'll send you a link about how you can book any of those things. So
Thank you,
thank you
everyone.
so much.
Thanks,
And
Christina.
all right, I'll let Alisha log off so she can get on with her Saturday.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful Saturday. See you later.